Every voice matters. Blue Lift is a podcast dedicated to address the issues that affect all of us, with engaging discussions with progressive thought leaders and experts as guests. Here's your host, Peggy Kingsbury.
It's another week, friends, and I'm so glad you all have decided to join us this week for Blue Lift. I really appreciate you spending time with us and listening to this. I truly do, so thank you so much. Our guest today is Adrienne Hines, and Adrienne is my friend.
Yeah.
And she's also, as the lead-in says, she is an expert, and that's who we have here on Blue Lift. We have experts, and we talk about a lot of important things. Adrienne is a strategic communications expert and policy consultant specializing in higher education, and that's a topic we have talked a little bit about on Blue Lift, but not a lot. So this should be exciting. She is the founder of Policy Comms. Her agency helps colleges, universities, and organizations navigate complex policy changes, funding challenges, and messaging strategies. The Democratic Party needs you. They're hiring. Please apply. With a strong background in advocacy and coalition building, Adrienne works to develop effective communication strategies that inform public perception, drive policy change, and strengthen community engagement. Again, the DNC is hiring. Please apply. Today, we're just excited to have her here. We're going to talk about strategic communications. We're also going to talk about higher education and how they are right now, apparently, at the forefront of some strange things that are going on. I just read before I got in the car to drive here that somebody in Congress, or one of the attorneys general, I guess, is writing a letter to Georgetown University, which is a private religious school, by the way, telling them that they must remove all DEI policies and procedures. And, you know, the pushback is, wait a minute, that is a private university and a religious one at that. Do you think we're going to see more of that, Adrienne, in higher education and this push on the government to tell universities what they can and can't do?
Yes. Well, thank you for having me.
You're welcome.
Great.
You're welcome
to be here. And actually, it was what I was looking at when I was actually waiting to come out here was the letter that just came out from our friend Linda McMahon, the chair of the commissioner of the U.S. Department of Ed. She just sent out a letter that I've not had the opportunity to see, but it's called the Final Mission, and it is there to disband and just get rid of the U.S. Department of Education. So that is her challenge. That is her charge. So the department received Friday night received letters that they could do a one-time only payout of $25,000 if they were willing to resign.
And these are all the employees of the Department of Education.
Every employee at the Department of Education, they got a one day, like you had to decide by Monday. You got it Friday night, you had to decide by Monday.
They love doing that stuff on Friday night to Monday, don't they? Yeah.
And then, and they said, because there's going to be big, rifts. Basically, they're going to just go through the department. So was February, it was before Valentine's Day, let's say February 12th or so, where the letter went out. There was a Dear Colleague letter that went out that was talking about DEI and gave all the information about what was DEI. Well, no, that's not true. They just said, get rid of all DEI stuff or else they're going to not pay. I was very frustrated because I'm not a lawyer, play one on TV. And I'm like, I don't understand how this is going through. Where's the outrage? Because the bottom line is the government has never defined what DEI is. They just say, get rid of all DEI. They don't have any true definition that you can counter. So they stopped funding of every grant and every grant policy that the U.S. Ed puts out there. Most of the U.S. Ed grants are for students to study harder, get support. It's not anything that has anything to do with DEI. So they froze all of those funds. And so these students just don't even know what's happening. So they continue the assault from other areas as well. So, for example, a lot of schools, Vanderbilt being one, gets a lot of money for their research.
Correct.
So the NIH grants and all of those, and they said you can't do DEI and NIH. So we're going to stop funding those grants. And then they did a tricky thing where they said, and we're going to put a cap on how much money we're going to give you in cost. So all of the research and all those other things that they have, they're just saying we're going to only cap it at 15%. Most grants, different schools get between 30 to 50%. What that means is money is not coming into the school, so they can't afford students. So they've had to rescind the admissions to many of the graduate students. So Vanderbilt, for example, which is a private school,
right,
has rescinded every graduate student admission for the upcoming year.
Well, I read in the paper this morning also. I read in the paper like a boomer, like I'm actually walking down the driveway, getting a physical paper and popping that thing open with a cup of coffee. I read it online, but I consider it reading the paper. That a lot of the universities, when they bring in PhD students, the student who's coming in to work towards their PhD has a very specific area of study that's just incredibly specific. And so let's say it's in some science sort of thing, but admitting that student is about so much more than just that student getting a PhD. There is really sort of an entire little small business built around that because they're going to be researching something very specific and very important that could be important to our health.
Yeah, exactly.
Who knows,
To the world, to the culture. That's the whole point. That's the point of getting a doctorate. So, they're taking that money away, and that means that the university then really has no reason to bring that PhD student on board. Because they also cost money, so they're just saying we can't afford that. So we're going to have to move money to get our undergrads through. So long story short, and I know this is giving you the whole to-do, but just maybe a couple days ago now, the issue has been, a lot of this has been pre-compliance and smoke and mirrors.
Right.
Because the letter went out to all the colleges, so then colleges got busy cutting DEI, what they thought DEI was. So we're going to get rid of the Women's Center. We're going to get rid of this. We're going to get rid of that. And this random stuff that they are pulling. And it's like, I don't really understand why you pulled that, but they've done that. And finally, lawyers have gotten involved and said, you know what, this is not a law. This is just a letter. It's just it's just trying to create chaos, basically.
Right.
And so the whole idea of pre-compliance is what the struggle is now, right? So this DEI band, pounding they're doing it on purpose to get people to do it so they don't have to do it themselves, and get people to not participate, get people to not go to college. There's another article that just followed up out of the New York Times, is like, is college for everybody? Oh my gosh, like now we're in a whole different thing where they're going to start, steering people away. Like, is it 4-year degree worth it? We don't think it's worth it. People are not doing it. It's not worth it. All these things. And I'm like, oh my gosh, this all has implications, because one of the things that we do know for certain, no matter what, people who have bachelor degrees make more money, like statistically. That's inarguable. Like, that's not any non-fact.
That's right.
So the whole idea of college for all was the ability to provide access for people to go to college.
Right, because some people, somebody wants to be a plumber. They just love the whole idea of how all the pipes fit together, and completing a task at your job every day. They love working with their hands, and God bless them, that's fabulous.
Exactly.
But everyone should have the opportunity to go.
The choice. Like, you can choose. Like, no one's saying you have to go, but you make that choice. And you never want the choice to be not available for you because of money. And that's really what started happening, right? Like, so first generation and people without money, their kids couldn't ever afford to go to school. Like, it was out of reach financially. Not that these were not some of the most brilliant people. And a lot of people just didn't go to school because they didn't have money.
Right.
So the idea over these last, 40 years was to say, like, that should never be the reason why someone doesn't go. So we're going to put things into place to ensure that. Now we're like pivoting and pulling that back and saying, you know what, not everybody needs to go to college. And I, don't want to be a conspiracy theorist, but the whole idea, if you listen to what Elon Musk says and some of these other, and Jeff Bezos and all those people who need workers in the warehouse, need workers on the line. You don't want educated people.
No.
You want people who are beholden to you, that you can pay $14 an hour to and terrorize. And that's, Jeff Bezos says that he wants his people to be scared to go to work. He said that, so they work harder. And if he has to get rid of them because they're scared of losing their jobs, he doesn't care. Like, it's just terrible.
Yeah.
But it's all in a plan. right? Like it's all in a plan because their children, Jeff Bezos's kids went to college. I don't know what Elon Musk, his bazillion children, I don't know what they're going to do. But Mark
I think his
Zuckerberg,
oldest doesn't have anything to do with him. So then I think they go down from there in age.
but Mark Zuckerberg's kids are going to college. So we know those people are going to go to college. And they're going to go to elite colleges and they're just going to reproduce that level. And then what about all the people, first generation, they're going to have to stay in the warehouse?
Well, and I think too, you bring up an interesting point because I'm 65. And so when I was going to college, I went my first 2 years to what was called back then a junior college. Mm-hmm. And I did that because of money. Mm-hmm. I had to work and save money so that I could then finish up my next 2 years at a university, which was still fairly close to home. But I didn't grow up in a time when we had all these grants and things where kids, could go to college like they can now.
Right.
So I think we have an entire generation who have never seen it the way it was back then.
Right. They
just assume college has always been available to everybody, pretty much everybody.
Right.
But that's definitely not the case.
That's definitely not the case. Mm-mm. And so this is why, though, this is the insidiousness of like DEI, because the people that you're talking about come into those like protected class categories. When I first moved here, I moved here to go work at Nashville State Community College. And I was actually the dean of basically the remediation group. And when I was working there, this is when they were transitioning their math remediation, and like so many people need math remediation.
Yeah.
And again,
I probably still do.
No, exactly. And like when you're older, like that's what goes out of your brain. Like you don't remember how to do that for real. So I remember it was a big room, and you had to go sit and kind of work on your own and all this stuff. And long story short, when they were making some changes, one of my first, I'd been here like 3 months, and I'm like up on my soapbox, and I got called out. It was a statewide meeting, and I just have to throw out, this was in 2013. I was the only person of color. There's probably 60 people from the community colleges around the state of Tennessee. And I found out later that I was the first African-American academic dean in the whole TBR system in the state in 2013. So that was a shocker to me. I didn't know that before I was hired. But the reason I bring that in is because when they were talking about some of the math things that they were talking about, and again, I was the only person of color, they were making choices that were going to hinder the people in remediation.
Right.
And when I had looked at the group of people in remediation in Nashville State, you look at it, it was women, it was older people, it was people of color, and it was like immigrants, English learners.
And when you speak of remediation, so that the listeners know, that's a program that you go through to get you up to the level that you need to be to enter college.
To enter college.
Between high school and college.
High school and college. There's a cutoff. And
because you're right, we do forget things. And if we're an older student going back to school, we might need a minute before.
We need a minute. And then it was all, and I remember this one woman, I loved her. She was maybe in her 40s, and she had decided to go back to school. And so much with education, not shame, but like people had a choice. She had been in school before, but then dropped out for whatever reason. So she was coming back. And it takes a lot for people to say,
it's
I'm
brave.
going to return. It's very brave. Mm-hmm. And she just walked into this room and with the computers and she cried. She just fell apart. She's like, I'm not going to be able, and I'm like, oh, it's okay. Like we can get it done. We can get it done. And these are all the choices though that they make.
Right.
That they don't take into account for the people. So they're making these choices that were going to negatively impact a certain class of people. And it's built into the system. So when you start dismantling, you start saying it's DEI or whatever, DEI just happens to also focus usually on people who are in the protected class group.
Well, sure. And I'll say a couple of things. I often, when somebody's talking about DEI, I just say, well, what is it you don't like? Is it diversity? Is it equity, or is it inclusion? And do you even know what those three things mean? And I may have shared this with some of the listeners before, but I'll say it again. So I've had two major somewhat long-term jobs in my life. The first one I got an interview because I was a woman. Mm-hmm. Now, the reason that the police department had to interview me as a woman is because the Justice Department had come in and said, you're not treating people right based on color and sex, and you're not hiring for your community, and you need to do that. So that got my foot in the door to get an interview, and then I got the job, and I will say I excelled at the job. I got promoted to detective. I did a really good job. The next move I made was to a corporation, and guess what? I got the interview because I was a woman. The company had said, we don't have any women in this office in this role, and that seems ridiculous. They're half the population. Mm-hmm. We have to stop hiring just white men. You need to just interview some women who on paper are qualified, not pick one out who's not qualified on paper, but I met all the specifications. I got the opportunity to interview for the job, and the man who interviewed me said, I'm interviewing you because you're a woman. I hope you understand that. And I'm thinking, oh man, last week I had a gun on my hip and I was protecting your family, but okay.
Exactly.
But I excelled. I got the job, and I excelled at the job, which, as you know, and you're not only a woman, but a woman of color, I had to work twice as hard. You've probably had to work 5 times as hard, but we had to work twice as hard to prove ourselves. So sometimes DEI just means let's open the door up wide and let's let more people interview. And I think a lot of folks don't understand it.
They don't understand that.
DEI also means that the young man at Publix who is autistic, who's bagging my groceries, has a job and something he considers important in a place where he can go every day. That's DEI also.
Yeah. Handicap parking spaces.
Handicap parking spaces. Yes. The parking spaces that might say for pregnant moms only,
Yeah, all of that.
Or a room to breastfeed your baby, which, now it's like that's just a given that should be offered at work. At least have a private space for that to happen to pump so that, all those things are DEI. And so when we lump all that together and say that it's bad, that's really foolhardy.
Right.
I just get very frustrated at that. So when we talk about higher education, I'm really, really surprised at the way the rhetoric is now. Like you said, it's sort of making higher education a bad thing, like universities are bad. All university presidents are bad. And I don't understand that, but more importantly, for your role, how are you helping universities deal with that? Because now they're all of a sudden having to justify to the community that they are good things.
So it is one of the challenges is first getting them to accept that is what's happening.
Okay.
So that is a big, big challenge. And again, so the whole role, like higher education and the role of president has changed. Like the role of a college president has changed over time. And because higher ed has been under attack, it's been a very, very specific attack. And one of the things that I always say that is so hilarious, they keep like, oh, leftist activities, leftist things. I worked in a corporation first, and then I switched to higher ed. So I've been in higher ed since 2000. And I was so disappointed on the inside because I'm like, oh, it's going to be a bunch of progressive liberal, like chit chat, fun. Oh, no. It is one of the most conservative and traditional spaces. So the fact that they have this bad thing, like, oh, they're getting treated. No, it's really, truly not 100%. Like I cannot say that enough times. So, but what started happening is government has, one of the reasons that college cost has gotten so high, again, thank you, Reagan, is that states and the federal government started cutting back on the subsidies. When more people started coming, then they're like, you know what, we're just going to pay less. We're going to start diminishing really the value, right? So we're going to underwrite less. So when I first started in 2000, I was in Virginia, the state covered 1/3. Covered 2/3. So you were paying 1/3. So if a class was $1,000, you would pay $300. By the time I left Virginia in 2013, they were down to paying 1/3. So now instead of you paying you're doubling your cost. You're paying $600, and people like the costs have gotten out of control. Well, the costs really haven't gone up. It's the amount that you're paying has gone up because your state legislature, a lot of them were conservatives, have cut back on the overarching funding.
Now, see, that is something I did not know.
People don't know that, and that's across the board.
So much sense because, I do know now that people are saying, college is getting prohibitively expensive. They're charging more and more. But what you're saying is, there may be a little bit of an inflationary increase, of course, but what it really means is that the state is paying less per student, and so now the parents or the student are having to pay the difference.
And guess who else is very happy about that? It's banks. The banks have lobbied for that. So Fannie Mae and all that. So now we also have, not only have we cut out the underwriting, so it's the move to privatization also, right? Like, so now more of the cost is going to be put on the private citizen, because again, like you said, I'm only 5 years younger than you, but when the school, even financing, because there used to be plus loans, remember there were like loans, like parents could take student loans and all of those other things. Those have all gone now. It's all just pretty much either you go through the federal government, get a Pell Grant, or, you get a student loan, but from Wells Fargo or whatever. And then they have the big processing companies that have been now, as you know, charged with all sorts of fraud and feasibility, all these things, because they were like predatory collectors.
Yes.
So it's what I call the educational industrial complex. Just like the military, there is so much money in education, and that's why it has now more of a focus. And so college presidents spend a lot of time trying to gin up money, so getting their endowments together and getting funding so they can do whatever they're going to do. So again, kind of in the appeasement compliance category in terms of communications, Harvard literally made a call. They're like, we're agnostic. We're going to just be neutral. So they're not speaking out on any of these. So all of this nonsense that is going on, Harvard, which we feel in the higher ed space, like they are the leaders. Like if anybody's going to do it, they need to do it because they have enough resources.
And they're not, they're just staying out of it.
They explicitly stated, like their statement is, we're good. We're going to just lay low because, Trump in their case has threatened to tax their endowment.
Right.
So they're like, we're just going to sit quietly. So that's what everybody's doing. So I'm trying to get people to plan, like you need to have a plan, because if they do cut Pell Grants, if they do start taxing your endowment, if they don't cover your research, what are you going to do? Like, what is your plan? And no one seems to be planning. What they're doing is like, we're just going to wait it out. That's where we are right now.
Well, and based on what we've seen the last few days, I'm not sure that's a bad strategy, because they hire them, they fire them, they hire them, they fire them. My Lord, no one can figure out what they take the money away, and the court says, no, don't do that. So
So one of the challenges, because I actually am working on a grant, and that's what I was just looking at with DOJ, and it's a high school. And they just got a letter that said, all these things about the ruling because they were sued. But what's happening is the suits are coming on a state by state basis. So the DOJ grants, they're like, if you're in these like 5 basically blue states, you get your money. If you're not in those states, you still have to fight for your money. So it's very crazy.
Well, and that's interesting because then, that's a good point that you raised, because then it could be that some of the states will not want to sue the government to get those things because they are aligned politically.
100%. So Tennessee was very disappointing. I was talking to my friend at Meharry.
So it's the people who suffer.
Yeah, I was talking to my friend at Meharry because Meharry, just like more than Vanderbilt, if they can't get their indirect cost reimbursed, like it will take them almost out. And so attorney generals got together to write a letter to protest, and guess who did not sign? So Tennessee specifically said, don't even come over here because we're not gonna participate in this. So Tennessee is, whatever happens is going to happen here in Tennessee because allegedly, Bill Lee is the person. And that our ex-commissioner is number 2, is the deputy commissioner at the U.S. Ed.
Yes, I know.
So
yes.
So we're getting nothing.
Well, and when I read about them doing away with the Department of Education, and I've gotten into a conversation with a few people about it because, they'll say, well, but they're just what they're going to do is they're going to take that money and send it to the states. And isn't that how it should be done? Well, of course, you and I have a lot of feelings about that because, giving it to the states is the same thing. I told a friend of mine, I said, okay, I hear you, but let's talk about this. I said, you've got 5 kids. Would you give all 5 kids $20 and expect them to spend it wisely? And she said, oh, hell no. Because I know what would happen. And I said, that's exactly right. So giving the money to the states is not the answer.
It's not. And I think people don't understand what Department of Ed, because everybody's like, oh, no woke curriculum, Obamacare, all that. Like, again, curriculum is developed at the state level. It never was. What the U.S. Department of Ed does is ensures, again, equity, which is why they're going against it. It ensures equity and treatment for all students. And especially one of the things that on my little Republican people who I don't know, because I've worked with some of these ladies being in Tennessee, all those people who have those IEPs and all their little kids who need all that special support. Do you understand? Like, that is what the Department of Ed makes sure that your child has access to
and
those
an IMP for people like me who don't know. I've asked because I finally learned that, but that's an individual education plan. And what that means is, for example, if little Johnny is dyslexic, he may need a little extra time on word problems.
A tutor. He might need a tutor.
Yeah, or he might need a tutor. And so that's the sort of thing that the federal Department of Education makes sure that he can have. When we do have a child who has a disability, say it's a developmental disability, Down syndrome, autism, etc. I would say that less than 0.5% of the population would say that those children don't deserve the same right to education as everyone else. So that's 99.9%.
Right. And again, that's very different from when I was in school. Because again, when I was in elementary school, they used to have special education buses, and they would take those students elsewhere. Like, they were not mainstreamed, and they were just like, you get what you like.
I actually did drive by a special education school today. That now that you say that, and I did not know that Nashville had one.
I think you would have. It's probably have to be private. It would have to be private.
I don't know. I was going to my CPA's office, and it said special education school. But anyway, you're right. I mean, some states are going to say, "Oh no, we can't have our children with those children."
Right.
And then also, the Department of Education also, like you said, does enforce those things to make sure that
people are treated fairly. And, and so when you talk about vouchers, which passed, and again, I could have a whole nother podcast on that, but I think where we need to really watch and where people need to understand is that there are a lot of implications with private schools. And there was a woman on Facebook, I'll never forget, she had adopted 2 children from China. She was in Williamson County, and she was appalled because her kids didn't get into FRA. She had applied to FRA, and
which is a very exclusive private school.
Franklin Road Academy, a very exclusive private school. And they were like, no, ma'am. Like, because they had special needs. They didn't speak English. There was a whole bunch of things. And she just was like stunned. And she was looking at FRA because she was in Williamson County, and her children, she felt that she was not getting the support that she needed. And again, does Williamson County and does any county really have like Chinese interpreters, like, or anything? If you have a 7-year-old Chinese student who does not speak English, like, what do you like? What kind of support can you even is available? And so, and you can jump up and down, or you can privately find somebody, but you're going to have to pay. The school system is not going to be able to support you on that. And all of those things cost money. So, is the school going to be willing to spend $10,000, $20,000 on your student because you have those needs? So then she got all, in a huff and was like, well, I'll just go to private school. And they didn't have to take your child. And that's what people don't seem to understand. Not only do they not have to take your child, but they can kick your child out for no purpose. And you're still going to have to go back to the public school because your child has to be in school anyway. So,
well, unless your child apparently has parents who are undocumented immigrants.
Oh, I know. I just saw that today.
And then in Tennessee, at least, we're trying to say no. I mean, for listeners, I think this episode's not going to come out for probably another month or so. But at the time we're taping this today, a bill has just made it through committee that says that school boards can decide not to educate children of undocumented parents, which, listeners, what I want to make sure you understand is this. I'm not making commentary on immigration and undocumented people. I think you probably know me well enough to know how I feel about all that. But my point here is we're talking about children. We are punishing children for something some people feel their parents have done that is wrong. And I just said to my last guest, I said, it's the proverbial slippery slope. when are we going to say, well, you know what, both your parents are crackheads and they're in prison. We're not going to educate you.
Well, that's the thing.
They're not paying taxes. We're not going to educate you. I mean,
and
where does it stop?
Exactly. And a lot of these people are paying taxes, which is the crazy thing. And again, a lot of parents are not going to enroll their kids. You're going to have kids like roaming the streets.
Well, I know.
Like with no education. Is that what we want for our city?
It's just the whole thing is absurd. But just the idea that somebody thought it was smart to and thought it was the right thing to do to put a bill like that forth, and the fact that it passed through committee is scary, really, as to where we're headed. So when we talk about higher education too, I heard I read this article I was reading about Georgetown, and it also mentioned other universities. I believe that President Trump said that he X'd or tweeted, well, I don't know what you call it, but he truthed, which really he's going to have to change the name of that whole channel to just lied. Yeah, it's just lied. There's no truth social. Let's lie, and we can do it socially. Anyway, he said that any university that allows illegal demonstrations will not get money, and that made me think. And I actually had a conversation with my husband Paul this morning. What is an illegal demonstration? In his mind, is it Muslim students hold signs? Oh, and he said specifically anti-Semitic demonstrations.
Right.
So is it an anti-Semitic demonstration if the college has a Muslim student union?
Yeah. Well, this is the same category as DEI. There is no definition.
Right.
And so these are another Dear Colleague letter. And again, the anti-Semitic movement, that has gotten a lot of traction. And again, being in the space, I can tell you every group has been challenged. But let me be clear. Muslim students, if not more so, at least as many events have happened against Muslim students as it is to the Jewish students as well.
And of course, so I don't like anti-Semitism, anything about it. I can't. I don't understand it, and I think it's racism, and it's horrible. I feel the same way, though, about discriminating against any other group of people.
So like anti-Muslim demonstrations as well.
It's ridiculous.
It happens. So it's, when we watched the 3 women college presidents go in front of the Congress, and all my friends in higher ed, as we're like on group chats, we're just like dying because and one of my friends is chief counsel at Meharry, and I was texting her, I was like, oh girl, they did not prep the ladies up, but they were answering questions like academics, and that was the problem. Like, they would not sound biased. They're like, oh, it's nuanced. All the things they were saying was 100% correct, but it just doesn't work. Congress was not ready to hear that level.
Well, and I don't know if you know this about me, but I was an adjunct instructor at Columbia State for a little while, and I loved doing it. And the whole reason why I left, I was doing criminal justice, and I was doing it as a hobby because it pays nothing.
Exactly.
Adjuncts make nothing, but I did enjoy it, and I stopped doing it because the Tennessee legislature was starting to get into what could be instructed. Right. And of course, in criminal justice, my text had an entire chapter on profiling.
Right.
And I was teaching introduction to police work, and I was also teaching police procedures. You cannot teach those 2 classes without talking about some difficult topics. And I just wasn't ready to pay an attorney when somebody's mama sued me. So I just quit doing it. But my whole point about telling that little story is, I did learn that the academia world is a little bit different. So I'm used to a corporate world, and as you know, I'm a very direct communicator. And and luckily as an adjunct, you don't have to pay any attention to any of that. Right, I literally just get out of my car, go teach my class, get in my car, go home.
Right.
But I was in the email threads, and they would have 5 days of emails over the coffee maker.
100%. That is, I could tell different stories. We anybody in higher ed, one of the things about higher ed that is very funny is that everybody who's gone to college think they know what it's like, but you don't know till you are in there and you know that. And like, there are these conversations. A really quick, funny story. I was acting dean of the English department. I'm a business person in sociology. And they had this machine. It was called a Rizzo machine. This is in 2009. Now, a Rizzo machine is basically a big mimeograph machine. And it would break down all the time. And the company's like, we are not supporting it anymore. So I was going to study for my comps. So over break, I removed the Rizzo machine. People are calling my house. The English department are the gnashing of the teeth. Where is the Rizzo machine? Where did you put it? You need to get it back. I'm like, we're getting you a new one. We're going to get you a new copier. It was like a thing. It was really a thing.
I was rather amused about the break room coffee maker discussion, and then so I would teach and I would use this computer panel because I actually had students on other campuses,
right,
and they were watching me by video, and the whole process was a bit complicated, and I had to get lessons on how to use it. But apparently, I discovered that I was leaving it in a state that did not marry up with what a regular full professor, whatever programs would come up, when he logged in. And I would come in and I would find these little Post-it notes with these instructions. And I would be like, I don't even know what that is. So finally I started leaving my own notes. And finally the last one I left was, I'm a good person. I'm also just an adjunct. I have no idea what these Post-it notes mean, and so you can stop now, because it was just kind of funny.
I love it.
And then he and I actually met. We had a wonderful conversation about it. But I hear what you're saying, which is interesting, because I think it is important when we communicate with other people to do our best to understand where they're coming from.
Right.
And like, my day job is insurance, and so sometimes I will talk about accidents in terms that are just very black and white.
Right.
And I have to remember that those are emotional events for people.
Right.
I've dealt with thousands, probably hundreds of thousands of accidents and catastrophes and home claims and all that all my career. But I do have to sometimes remind myself and my team that these are emotional times for people.
Right.
So I think you're right. When we saw those college presidents testifying, it was very painful for me to watch, because I did feel like they were communicating in a way that wasn't transferring to Congress. Although who knows how you can communicate.
And you can't. You can't. And that's the thing. And they got set up, and every single one of them is gone now.
Yeah,
and they were very happy about that when that was the setup. That was the setup.
But here's the thing I was thinking, it just amazes me. So the whole rigmarole was because, some Muslim students and Muslim supporting students, Palestinian supporting students, decided to do protests, and they allowed that to happen. And also at the same time in history, we also had all these people storming the Capitol, beating police officers, bloodying them, brandishing weapons to them, spraying chemicals in their faces, and now they've all been given a pass on that. And so, I'm saying, gosh, I'm thinking at the university, I guess if it had been a MAGA group having a protest, well, that would have been okay. Right. Just sit all over the president's office for weeks and weeks and demand your rights.
Well, and that's kind of, and then that kind of loops back to like a communications thing and all of that too, right? Because, they were the positioning, and they've been able to do that. Now, to be honest, one of the things is like MAGA has not been like, right-wing people have not been allowed to speak. Inflammatory people have not been allowed to speak on college campuses.
Well,
that has happened. And from the left too. You can't get radical left people. Like, there's a limit.
There's a limit.
And so that's what they were saying, like, oh, you're not letting us, the young Republicans, all that. That is all not true. But that was the narrative that was being driven. So they have deemed themselves like, we have been suppressed and oppressed. And so all we were trying to do is protest. Our protest was good because we were going for something good. The Palestinian protest is bad because they're bad people. Do you know what I'm like?
Right.
That's what they're saying. And, how schools, handle protests. Again, when I was in college, it was about South Africa, and they did a little shanty town, and some people took over the admissions office for it was very weak protest. It's very weak sauce protest, I have to say. But, the school kind of was like, okay, get it out of your system. You're like 19, 20-year-olds. Like, you have your ideals. We'll support the nonsense.
for a little bit of time.
For a little bit. And, and they were embarrassed and they're like, you need to divest and all that stuff. And we had an international school. That was my major, international relations. So it had some implications, but they let us go and it didn't get out of hand. And from what I have a couple of friends at Columbia and other places, and they said it was not terrible. It was a regular, protest, almost every generation protests something.
Of course they do.
That's what you do when you go to college. You get together and you have your ideals and you do all that kind of stuff.
Well, and I think a lot of the politicians who were, waxing poetic about all of this, it certainly had forgotten what went on during the Vietnam era.
That's what I'm saying.
And of course we know some of that ended up very, very badly, like Kent State.
Mm-hmm.
But there have been. That's one of the things we brag about as Americans, right? That we get to protest and have our say. So at least right now, today, in the year of our Lord in 2025, March 6th, we do. We don't know about tomorrow.
Yeah.
But.
And so I think at the end of the day, one of the directions that people are going, and this goes against DEI, is freedom of speech. That's one of them, the First Amendment. So that's what people are using to fight DEI. Because how are you going to tell me I can't choose gender? I can't have you whatever. I can say what I want, and same with curriculum. I can that is the freedom. And really, when people scream First Amendment, it is about the government shutting down. It's not even really individuals' freedom of speech. And so the government trying to shut down what is being taught is just ludicrous, really. And it goes against it's anti-First Amendment. And then the second piece that people are working with DEI is privacy. So how do you how would I know what's going on with your gender and all those things, unless that's all HIPAA violations? How are we going to get around that? So those are the two directions that people are fighting and countering the DEI, as opposed to the context of give me a definition. And they have pushed back on that as well. Because if you're going to cut a grant, and grants are written with very specific things, there's no such thing as a DEI grant. We might have money that says we're going to take part of the gym and make it into, let's say a breastfeeding space. Is that DEI? And so that's one of the things of the grant, and that's $10,000. You're going to cut that one thing. Or if I say I'm going to take a room and then allow students to come, African-American students can come, but anybody can use it. Is that a DEI space that we're offering incremental tutoring? Does that make it DEI? So they don't have any of that data. They don't have any of those things.
Well, I think that's smart. I think that's smart to attack it from the purely legal standpoint and not even truly worry about the definition, because we're not going to win that battle. Because they don't want there to be, for example, African American studies.
Right, exactly.
When obviously white man studies are fine because we've got
that's what we do.
That's the entire curriculum.
Right.
So I like that. I like that idea that they are going at it that way, because I am seeing now that some of these very oppressive things the administration is doing are, the courts are pushing back a little bit. Yeah,
exactly. So we have to just keep our fingers crossed that the courts, and again, but it starts being state by state, because I can't imagine in Tennessee, if people went forward, I don't think our people would be supporting
and in
us.
Tennessee, I think I don't like them telling the University of Tennessee or any of the university system colleges those sorts of things, but at least there are other options. We have plenty of private colleges and Well, our time has really gone fast today. This is fascinating.
I could talk about it forever.
Well, and I want to have you back, because we've got some other topics that we need to discuss that you deal with and mess around messaging and that sort of thing. And so we're gonna have you back in the next month or so if you'd like to do that.
Yes, I would love to do that.
And then we can also hash out what has happened, because I'm finding now, when I started this podcast, things didn't change overnight.
Yeah, this is a crazy time.
And now when I wake up, I look at my phone. I'm like, what happened overnight? So it's been kind of interesting to listen. I've been listening back to a few of my older episodes. I'm like, oh, geez, man, I didn't have the 8-ball. I didn't know that was going to happen.
Right.
And I do think I'm so flustered. I think a minute ago I just said the Lord of our year 2026. I've completely just skipped over 2025.
Which I think is a good plan, honestly.
Well, I really believe we've lived a year of life already.
We have.
It may be March, but I'm done. I'm ready for New Year's.
And that's one of my challenges. Honestly, I was telling my friends, I'm like, I'm really not okay. I don't know. It's been bad. It's really been bad.
Hang on, because next week I have an appointment to do an episode with a therapist.
Excellent.
Who is going to help us deal with the stress. And I really think that no matter what side you're on, it's a very stressful time. And she's going to help us with that, and says that, all of her clients are bringing it up. the political situation. So hang on for that. After your episode airs,
I'm excited. I want to definitely hear
out.
because it's bad. I need some tools.
Yeah, I need some tools other than Jack Daniels. Actually, not Jack Daniels. I forgot about Jack Daniels. Jack Daniels is problematic. We're
Uncle Nearest. You want to go?
We
Uncle
are
Nearest?
Uncle Nearest people in my house, man. I do enjoy some Uncle Nearest.
Yeah.
I don't mind saying that. Make me a good old fashioned with Uncle Nearest.
There's some good old fashions out there.
Yeah, and I make a pretty good one too. You'll have to come over.
Definitely.
Well, thank you so much, Adrienne.
Thank you for having me.
If someone wants to keep up with you or learn about your company, where would they do that?
They can go to my website, which I try to post pretty regularly, like blogs and insights. So that's policycoms.com.
Okay, policycoms.com.
Mm-hmm.
Excellent. Well, I really appreciate you being here. And listeners, I appreciate you listening. Email me. The email address is in the show notes. If you've got topics you'd like to hear about, if you think you'd be a great guest, if you know someone who would be, I'd love to hear from you. And I'd love you to like and share this episode as well. Everybody have a good week and be good to yourself. And remember, every voice matters.